Hey homies, what's up? Ryan Wynn here with our final installment featuring the Marvel Comics Tryout Book. I know. I'm bummed too. But we get to look at the penciling section today, which is kind of cool. It's a shorter section, so it'll be a shorter video. Let's get into it. This was probably the section most people filled out first. It was actually the last section I touched as a kid, and I barely touched it at all. I was way too intimidated. I was making my own comics at the time, just on copy paper and sketch paper and stuff like that. So I was drawing a lot, but I was so intimidated by this book. Looking at it now, it did its best to make me feel unintimidated and comfortable, but I was not. Tools and technical information. A penciler tells in pictures the story outlined in the story plot. He has to imagine panels and panel sequences that will best dramatize the events described in the story plot, and then he has to draw them in pencil. Pencilers generally use fairly ordinary pencils. Usually they prefer pencils with a rather hard lead, a number 2 HB or harder, which is less messy and easier on the inker. Sidebar: the softer the lead, the more lead is on the paper, and it almost creates like a grease texture that is really difficult to ink over. Alright, back to this. Some use mechanical pencils or special artist pencils. Some, like the artist who penciled this book, John Romita Jr., even use erasable blue pencils. Another sidebar: erasable blue pencils, also called non-photo blue, you could draw in those, and the photographer who would take photos of the final inked pages before they went to print had a special filter, much like the filter you use in your Adobe Photoshop to remove blue. And of course, they frequently use erasers. There are no rules about equipment. Any erasable pencil you find comfortable is fine. I'll get a close-up of the tools there. Eberhard Faber, you see that on the pencil? I believe years and years back Eberhard was bought out by another company, and Faber is Faber-Castell? Something like that. I don't know. Go Google it. Tell me how I'm wrong. Simple tools. The goal. What have we said? Chapter after chapter is the absolute number one concern, everyone? Say it with me now. 3, 2, 1. Storytelling. The penciler's role is the key role in the chain of creative disciplines which are allied to make comics. True, the writer of the plot begins the creative process. He creates the story, but the penciler is the first to tell the story in the form the readers will eventually see. Storytelling is conveying information. So a little side note on that. What they mean by storytelling isn't illustration. It isn't about how good is your drawing. Storytelling is, like it says here, conveying information. How simple is the panel in describing what you want the reader to think is happening or to know is happening? And then how well do you convey panel-to-panel action that builds the story? Has nothing to do with illustration. All right, in this next section, we talk about the different shots. Long shots, medium shots, and close-ups. Now, long shot, you know that's where Ann Nocenti and Art Adams got long shot's name. They were looking at the script, trying to come up with a name, and they were like, long shot. One of the best X-Men ever. So long shots, also called establishing shots. These are good for conveying settings or establishing a locale. They're also, of course, good for showing things or events of great magnitude. Medium shots, also called action depth shots. These show full figures or objects with no parts hidden, cropped by the panel borders. These shots are good for showing action. Most televised sporting events are shown almost entirely from this depth for that reason. They're also good for giving an overall view of a person or object. And lastly, close-ups. Oh, too close. Close-ups. These include any shots closer than action depth. If any part of the subject of the picture is cropped by the panel border, the picture is a close-up. Generally, close-ups are used for faces or expressive gestures. They're good for showing reaction, emotion, and feelings, and also for showing what a character looks like facially, or for showing detail on an object. There are 3 priorities for pencilers to keep in mind, though these are really part and parcel of storytelling. Drawing. Good draftsmanship is very important. Accurate perspective, solid anatomy on the figures, and good composition are essential. Realism is not essential, but convincingness, again, is. There's that amazing word again, convincingness. You gotta let me know that a fist is a fist, a wall is a wall, a pool is a pool, a trash can is a trash can. I need to be convinced without trying to figure out what a thing is. Drama. Pace the story well. Try to let it flow in an interesting manner. You are the director, and the characters you're drawing are your actors. Move them through the story in a dramatic manner. Use lighting and angles for dramatic effect. Dynamics. Because our pictures don't move, creating the illusion of movement within them is vital. Ooh. Look closely at the terrific penciling by John Romita Jr. on pages 10 through 14, 17 through 18, and 21 through 25. So then after the plot, we get the blank Marvel boards. This had me very excited. I thought this would be my way into comics. I would break in while I was still in high school, the way Jim Shooter had. Didn't turn out that way. I barely finished high school. I wasn't getting into comics during high school. We can take a look here. It looks like they only have a bleed line, not a trim and a bleed line, as modern boards would. And here you can see Xerox, a word you don't see a lot. Stats. That's how many statted panels. Like if there's a background in panel 1 and they want it in panel 2, you put how many of those. And a code. I think that's a color code or something. I'm not quite sure about that. But anyways, this is where I placed all my dreams, this blank board. And then I never touched it because I was so intimidated. And then I think eventually a summer later, I felt like, hey, I should make use of this board that I have, and started drawing a Wolverine with giant things. So it looks like I had come off my Jim Lee phase and was like halfway through an Adam Hughes phase. I was trying to be a little more realistic, but ugh. Yeah, I say ugh like I drew this last week. It's really not that bad. It was probably about 14 or 15 when I drew this. Doing it blue pencil, trying to act like a professional. It's the whole thing. You act like a pro until you become a pro. But then here's you can laugh, you can make fun of me. But again, I was like 14. I got real brave here and decided to draw Longshot. Longshot was created by Ann Nocenti and Arthur Adams in the mid-80s. He eventually ended up in the X-Men after his own miniseries. He was a cool character. I didn't mind that he had a mullet because he was from a different dimension, so it's not like he just had a bad haircut. It worked for him, it worked for his design and his personality. They tried to change it a few times and it was bad. And you can see Mojo in the background here. And I believe... oh, that's Spiral. Okay, yeah, that's Spiral. We got Mojo, Spiral, and Longshot. Longshot's powers were cool. He could touch an object and read its past. He was extremely lucky, and he was really good at throwing these little blades that he had. He also had bird-like bones, so he's extremely light and very fast, but kind of fragile. It's a very interesting character. If you haven't read the original series, I highly recommend it. It is slightly dated in that you can tell it's an 80s comic, but the story is great. It's Arthur Adams' first series, so it's a little rough compared to what he does now, which is masterful. But everything is there. He was really looking at Michael Golden's work, I believe, so the storytelling's really solid. The illustrations are very ambitious. It's a good series. It's got some great inking. Will Spertasio did some inking there. Check it out. So it looks like we have one last section here on the inside back cover. Plotting. Let's take a look. A plotter does most of his work in his head. Unlike most of this book we've seen, the work is done on boards. He or she invents the story. Often the plotter is given an idea or a springboard. Now, those of you that don't know, a springboard is a jumping off point. You may have heard that term. The editor will give you an idea, like Spider-Man has a secret admirer and Doc Ock is up to no good, and the writer or the plotter will run with that. By ending this story 2/3 of the way through, we've simulated as best we can the actual working conditions professional Marvel Comics plotters face. You've got to start, now you've got to come up with the ending. That's pretty fun. And then we've got our fantastic technical illustration of our typewriter that we saw in, what do we see that in? Oh, we saw that in the scripting section. Look at that tight stack of typing paper. That is really tight. Anyways, tools and technical information. Plotters generally stare at blank walls. Many use notebooks and pencils to scrawl down ideas. After they conceive a story, they type the story plot on regular typing paper. Examples of the story plot form can be found earlier in the book. We saw that. The goal. So it's funny here. What was the goal in all the other chapters? The first goal was, say it with me again, 3, 2, 1. Storytelling. But here, you've got to come up with the story. You're creating a good story. That is the goal. A story, in the very broadest sense, is a conflict and its resolution. In order to understand a conflict, some information is required about the individual or individuals involved. Therefore, the simplest possible blueprint for a story is as follows. Are you ready? Introduce the characters. Establish their situation. Introduce the conflict. Build suspense. Reach a climax. Show the resolution. Every great story has these. Every great writer uses these as their checklist. It's not a formula. It's a way of life. Oh, they even say this here. This is not a formula. It's a definition. Unless those elements are present in a work, it is not a story. It may be something else, but it's not a story. The basic elements listed above are in every story from Little Miss Muffet to War and Peace. Having those elements present does not make something a good story, just a story. In order to make a good story, a writer needs two things: the skill and craft to communicate ideas effectively, and the ideas themselves. In other words, he or she must be able to say things in a way that reaches the audience, and he or she must have something to say. It's not as easy as it sounds. The skill and craft of communicating in writing is knowing how to effectively organize abstract ink smudges, letters, into large and larger groups. Words, sentences, paragraphs, scenes, literary devices, sequences, stories. That's far too ambitious a subject for this page, but if you want to be a writer, you've got to be able to make the smudges serve your purpose. You've got to know what foreshadowing and parallel construction are, and be able to use them and other devices effectively to communicate your points within a story. Remember, we all use the same words as Hemingway. It's how they're organized that counts. As for having something to say, some point, some insight, some idea to share through a story, that comes from within. Got something to say? Look around in there. You probably do. Give it a try. This brings us to the back cover, the Army parody poster. Marvel Comics wants you. This is all the shipping information, how to get your information to Marvel. Their old address at, was it 387? Yeah, 387 Park Avenue. And you had to send return postage. Now this image here was drawn and inked by Terry Austin, who is mostly known as a Marvel inker, but he was also a fantastic illustrator. Pretty decent writer. The last few years he has ended up inking Sonic the Hedgehog. He left mainstream comics years ago. He's a style guide for many inkers. Many inkers. Kind of a thin-headed thing there, but still looks cool. And the giveaways to Terry are not only his like blunt lines with these round ends, but these bloopity bloops, where he goes thin and then thick on the heavy part. Stylistically, that's very Terry Austin. Not that other inkers don't do that, but this is the way. This is his stroke. He was famous for inking John Byrne, Art Adams. Name somebody at Marvel. He inked them. Brett Blevins. Alright, well I hope you've enjoyed this series. I had a lot of fun going through this book and sharing all these thoughts and ideas in this old tryout book with you. If you have any questions, we can do a follow-up video. We can look through the book. I'm going to try to make scans of the pages so we can all look at it online too, not just in a video. Thanks for joining. See you next time. Take care. Stupid cat.